Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 42. This month has been an absolute whirlwind for nature journaling. We've had International Nature Journaling Week at the beginning of the month, which was a joy-filled week of nature journaling and sharing with people across the world. That was just the start of all the things that are happening this month. I've just finished giving a presentation to a group of environmental educators for the EE Forward Summit, a gathering created by Tanya Marion from Talaterra. The theme for the summit was water, and we did a nature journaling exploration of a mangrove habitat near my home. It was so much fun. There are also two more amazing events coming up before June is over, and that is the Wild Wonder Teachers Conference and the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference. The Teachers Conference is going to be a chance for educators to learn how to bring nature journaling into their classroom, homeschool, or informal learning setting. The conference is for anyone who's interested in learning to teach nature journaling, no matter what level of experience they have. The Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Teachers Conference is a live 2-day event running from June 21st and 22nd. And then to finish off the month with fireworks, there's going to be the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference, which is a 5-day long gathering of teachers, artists, nature writers, and thought leaders who come together to explore different aspects of nature journaling in an action-packed schedule of events. The Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference will run from June 23rd to 27th, so beginning directly after the Teachers Conference. There's going to be some amazing speakers and presenters, including Amy Tan, J. Drew Lanham, Jane Kim, who created the Wall of Birds at Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Richard Louv, I can't wait for this one, the inspirational Tony Foster, and so much more. There is so much happening in this conference. Some of the presenters at the upcoming conferences have been guests on this podcast. And for today's episode, I thought it would be fun to revisit some portions of these episodes to connect with each of the teachers and their work and their stories. So let's do that. I'm going to start with Liz Clayton Fuller. Liz is a scientific illustrator and fine artist who specializes in painting birds. For her class this year at the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference, Liz is going to take us through her process of painting quick bird studies in gouache. I've been thinking about playing around with gouache, but I've always felt a little intimidated about the thought of switching mediums. I've always done watercolor, so I'm personally excited to learn from Liz about gouache. I've taken Liz's nature journaling course that she did through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and her teaching style is all about helping you get comfortable. She's very sweet and kind and will definitely ease you into the subject if it's new to you. So let's listen to this snippet of my previous interview with Liz about her early experiences of nature and art. I asked Liz if she had nature in her childhood.
You know, I did, but maybe not in the way that you might think. I kind of came to nature through art instead of coming to art through nature. So,
Okay.
you know, I'm the first bird watcher in my family. I'm the first artist in my family. You know, I'm kind of the random thing that happened and everyone was like, wait, what? How did we, how is this child possible? But I have been drawing ever since I can remember.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I was always drawing something or painting something, and I am so lucky to have had a super supportive family. My mom and my dad were always just giving me art supplies and letting me create and grow. So from a really young age, I was always just drawing. I loved to draw animals too when I was younger. So that was sort of my start as I was a kid.
That's great.
And along with that, you know, we played outside a ton and I always loved being outside. But, you know, when I was younger, I didn't have that connection to nature, and I kind of built that through my artwork later in my life.
It's interesting because a lot of kids have this freedom in art and drawing as youngsters, and then they get to a certain point, maybe 7 or 8, and then the fear kicks in and they and they give it up. So you just didn't have that point where the fear kicked in, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, I didn't. And I think maybe, you know, now as like a grown woman, the fear is more present,
Okay.
of course. But, like,
Yeah.
you know, I think
Yeah.
that every artist is always hypercritical of their own work. But
Yes.
yeah, I built confidence in art early, and I'm super thankful to have that now.
That's so good. And so at what point, how did that happen that you connected art and circled back to nature?
Right. So when I was in high school, I think a lot of artists will relate to this. I was kind of the only artist in my grade, or like the best artist in my grade. There was this one other guy who was incredible, but we were like the artists.
Yeah.
So in high school, I became a vegetarian and started doing a lot of artwork about animal rights and sort of my experience learning about all those things. So that was kind of a beginning to painting animals. That was like me dipping my toe in and learning a little bit. And then in college, I majored in illustration, and I was taking all these classes that were sort of pushing me to do this super whimsical, creative, artsy work. And I never felt like it was clicking for me. And I always felt like I was just struggling through these paintings and drawings, and that I never loved them. And then I took a scientific illustration course, and I was like, this is my sweet spot. Like, I didn't even know that there was a career where you could just draw nature accurately, and that's all that you had to do. And I was so excited.
Fiona Gillogly is 17 years old and began nature journaling 5 years ago after a chance meeting with John Muir, who instantly became her friend and mentor. For those of you who know Fiona, you'll know that she has an incredibly curious mind and loves to fill her nature journal pages with questions. As well as giving a keynote presentation at the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference this year with John Muir, Fiona is presenting a workshop called How to Science, the Nature Journaler's Guide to Asking Questions and Exploring Answers. Let's listen to Fiona speaking about her process of asking questions and then questioning her questions. You're famous for asking questions. This is your
Yeah.
This is when anyone thinks of Fiona Gillogly, they think of questions, because you have this way of making a journal page that is just covered in questions. You might have a drawing and some words, but then it's just questions. You have bubble question marks everywhere and lines going from question to question. And I'd love for you to talk about this, how it started, how you began to journal in this way, and also about what you have come to call question chains.
Yeah, so I've started asking questions a long time ago. I didn't initially start journaling by asking questions. That wasn't originally my practice, because I had come from a art background, so I hadn't really thought of like writing in my nature journal necessarily. But I did start asking questions. I think in my second nature journal was when I asked my first question with the little bubble question mark.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it kind of took off. I started realizing like I couldn't just ask one question and then another question separate. Like they flowed together and like they made sense in this sort of like here's my mental pathway of how I got here. And they didn't make sense if they were just all over the page in all different places. So I started connecting them with little arrows. It's questions that came from other questions or hypotheses and stuff like that. And so that's kind of where the question chains came from. So now I kind of connect all my questions in these kind of little roads all over my page of like my mental pathways and how I came to these different questions and stuff like that. So I've been asking questions in these little chains for quite some time. I recently kind of made a little switch because I was filling my page with so much writing that it was like running into each other and I couldn't even read it anymore. So I switched to a smaller pencil and I sort of put a little bit of air between my questions, which makes them take up more room, but I can also read them later. So that's nice. But yeah, it sort of evolved into this like solid letter, like just letters and bubble question marks in like ways that I couldn't even remember what I was doing. So yeah, I recently kind of made that switch to a smaller pencil. But yeah, they've evolved. They've evolved, and they're kind of cool. I really like how they work.
Yeah, and so this idea of building a question chain, it really helps you come to some really big, heavy-duty, interesting questions by starting with a simple question. Can you talk just a little about how you don't have to come to it with grand questions? You can start with a really simple question. How does that work?
Yeah, usually I like basically never start with like these big questions. Like I don't start with these like mind-bending weird things, you know? I start with like simple observations or simple questions and just kind of let my mind wander on that particular question and just write it down as my mind's wandering on that particular topic. And eventually I'll get to those cool questions. I'll get there. But I don't ever start there. So it's not something that you eventually I'll just be asking these crazy questions off the bat, you know. I always have to start at these simple questions and keep working to those.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be intimidating. Like people don't have to sit down with their journal and think, oh, I have to come up with a question that will change the world. You just have to say, what is that? Or why is it like that?
Why is it? Yeah. Yeah.
And in workshops I've come up against, because I'll talk a lot about nature journaling and how we just ask open questions. And sometimes people are worried that they don't have the answers. But it's not really about the answers for you, is it? Do you answer your own questions, or is it more about the questioning?
It is more about the process of the questions and asking the questions. Although I do on occasion look up answers and things like that to very specific questions. But the process of asking these questions brings me to thinking about things that I would not have otherwise. So even without the answers out of the equation right now, they are still intrinsically good in and of themselves. Like they're not just like the pathway to the answer. They are good in and of themselves. And so I have often I have asked people about answers before. I have looked up answers before. And I usually try to use those answers to build more questions. And so like now that I know that, how about this? Why this? So it's kind of this like, it's this constant process. I'm never done.
The Wild Wonder Conference is here because of the work of John Muir. He's the incredible driver behind all of this and a huge inspiration to everyone in the community. Jack has such a generous spirit and gives free online nature journaling workshops every week. He's all about connecting people with nature and also connecting people with each other through this beautiful community he's created. I want to share with you this touching moment in our conversation where Jack is talking about his parents and how their shared love of nature connected them together. Back when Jack was a young person, his mother noticed that he was enthralled watching someone nature journaling during a botany field trip, and after that she gave him his first nature journaling kit, which was the beginning of his life as a nature journaler. Jack is talking here about his mother's act of loving attention.
Yeah, I think that her gift to me started with just the act of attention. And attention is love. Sustained, compassionate attention. When you give that to another person, it completely changes you and your relationship with the other. And she saw me. She paid real attention. It wasn't that Jack was just out of the way, kind of following this woman around the field who had a journal. She said, like, what's going on here? And she noticed that kind of sea change in my focus and behavior, and she figured out what she needed to do to then foster the next step in me. And it's interesting that I now teach people the skills of attention. And my process started with her act of attention. there have been several kind of key people. My dad was a bird watcher, and originally when I got started bird watching, I wasn't really interested in watching birds. My dad was having heart trouble, and we needed to get him out for walks and exercise. And you say, like, Dad, you want to go for a walk? And he'd go, no. And if you said, hey, Dad, you want to go bird watching? He'd go, yes, let's go birding. And so it was kind of a backdoor way of getting Dad to go walk around. And so I went out with him a few times, and it was cool. And but then there was one day the two of us drove up to Point Reyes National Seashore, which is north of San Francisco, and there is a place there called Five Brooks Pond, and we took a walk around Five Brooks Pond. And at one point he said, Jack, let me show you something. And he went over to a bush, a willow bush by the side of the pond there. It was a very thick thicket. And he started going like this. He went, psh, 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 psh. He started making this little pishy noise. And as he did, this minuscule fairy of a bird comes dancing out of the bush in front of him. And as he continues to make the noise, the feathers part on the head of this thing, and these red feathers erupt out of the head of this green bird. And it was maybe 2 or 3 feet from my face. And we were just frozen still. He's making this noise, and this bird gets closer and closer and closer. And it was like my dad is Dr. Dolittle, right? and I was amazed by the bird, and I was amazed by him, and then he said, "Okay, now you do it." And he had me pish pish, and the bird keeps dancing around in the bushes, and then finally it leaves, and he says, "Now you find it." And he puts the bird book in my hand, and we go through the bird book, and we end up kind of boiled down to a couple of birds. And I'm dyslexic, so I look at the pictures and I don't read the text. Yeah. And then he says, okay, read what it says. And so I start working my way through the words. And it describes one of them as this sort of sedentary, slow-moving, sort of steady bird, and the other as this hyperactive, constantly flitting up. And I'm like, that's it. And so here's this ruby-crowned kinglet. Wow. And I got it. I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. Yes. And from that point on, I was all in. And I don't really remember the first part of that hike, but I remember every bird we bumped into in the second part of the hike post this bird. Invested. And yeah, this bird was my key. And on the way home, he started quizzing me about the birds we'd seen, and everything we had seen after that point, I came up with this like detail, like it's this, and we'd be seeing birds, on the wire, going by like, that's a scrub jay, I can tell because it's got the tail posture and all these sorts of things. Yeah. And so then what he did is it's the same sort of thing. It's like, okay, something's going on here with Jack. So it's like, then he'd say like, do you want to go bird watching? And I'd go, yes, let's go. And so we'd blast out together. And then I remember the day we'd been out bird watching, and we went to, there was a place called the Audubon Canyon Ranch, which was a bird sanctuary. And they had a little gift store there. And I remember he bought me my first binoculars. And it wasn't just that he gave me a gift. He told me I earned it.
Oh, yeah.
And I was so proud, and I got it. And so that was just, sort of just the right little things just at the right times. Yes. I then adopted his bird books, and I would bring them to bed with me.
Oh, wow.
And,
study them at night.
Study them at night with my little flashlight. Underneath the sheets, I got the Golden Guide to Birds of North America, and then same store on another trip. You saw me kind of looking through the field guides in this store, and he came up to me and said, "What do you notice, son?" And I said, "Look, Dad, this one is trees, and this one is bugs. Like, you can do this with everything." And he said, "That's right, son. All you have to do is pay attention." I said, "You can do this with everything." And so we came home. We had a wonderful day exploring around, and
oh, you're beautiful.
That night, when I went to bed, there was a pile of all those field guides on on my bed by my pillow.
Wow.
With a little flashlight.
Oh. That is so touching. Oh my goodness.
And so nature was in addition to kind of a portal to the infinite beauty and wonder of the world. It was a way to connect with those two really beautiful people in my life, and it brought me closer to them. And it brought us closer.
This recording touches me deeply every time I hear it. Connection is so important. It makes us thrive in life. I can say with all honesty that sharing moments of connection with others in this nature journal community has been one of the highlights of my life. Deep connections can be formed through our shared love of nature, and this can be done through the zeros and ones of cyberspace as well. At the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to connect with others in the community and build friendships. Emilie Moore is a nature journaler from San Francisco who runs regular twice-weekly sessions called Pencil, Miles and Chill. And in these sessions, people come together on Zoom to journal together, to share some social time, to share ideas and connect. And during the Wild Wonder Conference, Emilie is running Pencil, Miles and Chill sessions as well as social meetup sessions where we can come together to socialize as a community. Don't miss these special opportunities to get together with the community and to share this love of nature together. Robin Lee Carlson is a natural science illustrator with an interest in how ecological communities change over time. I interviewed Robin a while back and I was very excited to chat with her. She wrote a blog post for International Nature Journaling Week last year, and it was actually one of the reasons why I started this podcast. I wanted to know more about her work and dive deeply into her story. And for Wild Wonder this year, Robin is giving a workshop called Lively and Expressive Field Sketching in Brush Pen and Watercolor. I asked Robin about her lively style, and she explained how she tries to capture the life of the landscape and the elements within it.
I focus a lot when I'm drawing in a sketchbook and drawing in the field in capturing, I do think a lot about capturing the feeling of things, because what I'm wanting to do is I'm not trying to do anything perfectly accurately. I'm trying to much more convey the life of what I'm seeing around me, and that definitely means the living things, but also the life in the rocks and the soil as well, and conveying some sort of sort of character of everything. And so a lot of that means that I feel like my experience of drawing is a really important part of just the whole experience of being there and putting that into the journal, because I am there documenting it, I'm a part of that setting as well.
Absolutely.
And I mean, and that's something else that I really try to keep in mind, and I think is a really important part of sort of the idea of eco-reportage, which is, if you're in this place, you are changing it, and it is changing you, and you are not, you're not a passive observer, because there you are, you're walking on the ground, you're stepping on things, and as you observe it, it is changing you, and also you're there changing it. And so thinking about that and keeping that in mind as a part of the drawing means that I am, again, definitely focusing much more on capturing the entire feeling and, sort of picking out, I'm conveying this particular plant in this particular place, and what is around it, and what does that mean to me seeing it? Why am I wanting to capture it in this way? And so I'm always trying to sort of keep this big idea and picture of me and as a part of the environment, and the environment as a part of me as I'm drawing. In a way that I'm not experiencing things at all if I'm trying to do a finished illustration.
Melinda Nakagawa is a naturalist and educator with a master's degree in marine science. For Wild Wonder this year, she's giving a workshop called Dive In, Journaling Marine Wildlife of Monterey Bay. In our podcast interview, Melinda told a story of a walk she took with a trusted friend who later became her husband. And during the walk, he pointed out for Melinda a bird she hadn't seen before. And that was the moment that started Melinda on this new path. She started to see birds and notice nature in a new way. Listen to what happened next.
I really, pinpoint someone taking my hand and going out into nature and sharing their knowledge to help me see nature in a different way, change the trajectory of my life. At the time, I didn't know what to do for a career. I had taken over the family business, and it wasn't really what was in my heart. And, pretty soon afterwards, I was just so curious about nature that I, took night classes and lectures and, volunteered on the weekends with the local wildlife rescue, anything to get me closer to nature. And from then, I volunteered at the Marine Mammal Center up north of San Francisco. I live in California. And from there, that's when my love of marine animals just started to blossom. And I really wanted to know more about the seals and sea lions that lived in the wild. And so I just, decided I'm going back to school and, took all the prerequisite classes in the local community college and went back to college, so that I can study marine biology. And, that led to a graduate degree and just really learned so much along the process, of learning more deeply to look through a scientist's lens. I think that I was always really very curious, and my early experiences taught me how to notice things in nature, and then getting the scientific training of how do I use that as a scientist, really helped me develop even further. And actually going parallel to it with nature journaling, in my science class, we had to keep lab notebooks. And so we did detailed drawings of dissections. And I loved that part of class, being able to draw something realistically and show all the detail and all the different parts. And so that comes into my nature journaling, later, the things that I learned along the way. So that experience of being taken outside to nature with somebody that I trusted showed me that one person can change another person's life. At the time, I didn't know that biology was what I would end up loving and studying. And I think from that moment, I realized, maybe not at that moment, but later on, I realized that what I want to do is I want to do that for others. I want to be the guide to help you get closer to nature so that you can explore and discover that connection for yourself.
Sterre Verbokkem is an illustrator living off-grid with her family on a mountain in Spain. She lives surrounded by nature, and the wildlife around her makes their way into her illustrations. Sterre does both digital and hand-drawn work, and when she's working by hand, she's mostly using toned paper with a limited colour palette. For Wild Wonder, Sterre will teach a class all about working on toned paper in black and white. I asked her about her choice of materials and how she came to often be working on toned paper.
It was kind of just a way of experimenting, and then it felt just really good. And in my digital work, I use a lot of color, but in a way, I like to restrict myself in my hand-drawn work. Like if you only use black and white, you find out a lot of things about shading and other ways of adding depth to your work. And it's like if you're limited in your materials, it gets you to experiment more easily and go deeper into how to use that material. So I'll probably add another material later on, or might take something away, but it just happens gradually. It was actually yesterday that I tried a brush pen with ink for the first time on my toned paper. And at first it looked like I totally ruined the page, and I was like, I had been working on that for so long. But in the end, I just got back to my white charcoal and all the materials I always use and try to make them work. And it's really interesting, and it makes you go deeper in search for the material if you just work with those. And I find that really interesting. Really, it's also sometimes nice to not have the unlimited amount of choices in your life, kind of.
Marley Peifer is a nature journal teacher with a YouTube channel who brings us weekly YouTube videos where he'll be explaining some aspect of nature journaling, or taking us on a nature journaling adventure, or interviewing others who have a shared passion. Marley has a very philosophical way of looking at the world and thinks deeply about different topics, including learning, teaching, and education. Marley is presenting at the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference in a session all about how and why to start a nature journal club. He's also giving a session at the Wild Wonder Teachers Conference about teaching nature journaling when you're a beginner yourself. I love the way he thinks about this, and we talked a little about it in our chat together.
What I'm interested in is learning, and I think teaching is actually a subcategory of learning, and I think I'm a strong believer in teaching something before you think you know what you're doing.
Yes.
And that through teaching, it's selfish in some ways. You will learn faster, and you'll learn more when you're tested by teaching. And I also think that teaching or mentoring is a two-way street. So every single interaction that I have with a kid, for example, let's just talk about adults and kids, because I think that simplifies it in some ways. But every time I have an interaction with a kid, I think of it as a learning experience and a two-way street learning experience. And when you put yourself in that position and you're able to actually listen to what the kid or the student is saying and notice what they're seeing and what they're noticing, then you put yourself in a place where you can learn from them. And it also just makes it so that they're more open to you. And so I think the top-down style of teaching is really problematic in a lot of ways. And I have learned so much from working with kids. And the funny thing too is that I often would have, a week where I do the exact same exercise, and I don't tell the adults this all the time, but I do the exact same exercise with a group of kids. And then later that week, I do that same exercise with a group of adults. And the differences between kids and adults aren't as big as we sometimes think. And there's so much. Kids are really, if you want to learn about learning, you need to look at kids, because they're the masters of learning. And a lot of adults, we've lived for so long that we take things for granted. So that's one of the, things that our brain does that is beneficial. Because if you're walking around like a 3-year-old, you wouldn't, by the time you get your shoes on, you're like distracted by some other thing. And you're like, this glass of water is amazing. And you'll be there for 10 minutes playing with the water. And that would be a problem. Sure. That's understandable from a survival perspective. But the thing is our brain is so good at doing that we don't notice the sunsets. We don't notice the things, the snail, like eating a leaf. We just walk past all of that stuff. And our brain is really good at filtering out information. And so what we need to do, luckily we have a part of our brain that can, like our metacognition, can notice our own thinking and step back and be like, oh, I'm doing that adult thing where I'm filtering out all this information. Now there are times for that, like when you're driving down the road in traffic. And then there's other times, like when you're nature journaling, where you need to be able to turn that off, because that is, or just experiencing life, you need to be able to turn that off, because that's like one of the, and you see it in relationships also. It's like you take for granted the people that are around you every day. And so there's these things that we can learn from kids. And so I see teaching as a two-way street. And I really think learning is, learning is the thing that is the big category, and teaching should be thought of as kind of like a small part of that.
Roseann Hanson is a naturalist and explorer with more than 3 decades of nature journaling experience. Roseann is one of the principal organisers of the Wild Wonder conferences and loves to teach about using simple, minimalist tools. During the Wild Wonder conference this year, Roseann will be giving a workshop called Watercolour Made Simple. During our interview, we spoke about tools, and I asked her if she could describe the minimalist watercolour kit that she takes with her into the field.
Sure. So one of the things, when I first was adding sketches in watercolor, which I just fell in love with watercolor, I just went overboard, like I think all of us do. I had probably, I don't know, like 50 colors, and you just buy everything you see, because it's like, oh my gosh, that's beautiful, I want that one, I want that one. And I also took all the deep dives, especially with Jane Blundell, and they're an Australian, I call her the queen colorist.
Yes, she's incredible.
Amazing, and I just went in deep. And then I realized I was, I'm a naturalist, and nature journaling for me is about recording what I'm seeing. And I was getting a bit too bogged down in being like gripped. It's called gripped. If you've ever done rock climbing, there's this thing called gripped, where if you're climbing and you don't, all of a sudden you're like, ugh,
you're paralyzed.
Yeah, paralyzed. You're like,
okay.
I don't know what to do. And that's kind of how I felt when I got to that point in coloring, because I had too many colors, and I had like 5 different brushes, and you juggle things and lose things and drop things. And so finally I just said, okay, Jane Blundell was like into triads and getting things down to a really simple system. So I started teaching myself to mix all the colors I needed with just 3 primary colors. Then learned the hard way that red is not a primary color, even though a zillion tutorials tell us you just need red, yellow, and blue. It's like, well, it doesn't actually work that great.
Yes.
So right now, what I've finally come down to is I use what I call the true primary colors. So a cyan color, which for me, I love manganese blue, which Daniel Smith now has a lovely manganese blue hue. And then I use a magenta, so quinacridone rose, and then I love a neutral yellow, a yellow that's not like going to be really, really warm or really, really too bright. So I use aureolin, which again, Daniel Smith has really refined it, and it's no longer a fugitive color.
Yes, I was going to say
that's okay. It's not super, super light fast, but it's no longer considered fugitive, which means fugitive colors used to, you use them in a painting, and then if they're like hung on a wall, sometimes within even a few years, the colors fade. And I think some of the Turners, I think he loved, I think he said, and I could be wrong, so this is just a vague recollection, but
yes,
I believe it was one of the lake colors, like Scarlet Lake, early on, and he loved it so much, and he used it in everything, but it was so fugitive. But he didn't care, because he would just
loved
sell it, and he figured, oh well,
I'll be gone.
I'll be gone, so what do I care? But I'll have to look up what color that was, and if it was Turner.
That's interesting.
Anyway, so that way, and then I just add a couple of other, like my little second favorite colors are an Endanthrum blue, really, really, really dark blue that can actually be used as on its own for practically the darkest dark you need, and burnt sienna, which creates beautiful black really quickly with the blue. So those are all I use now, and I use one brush, a travel brush, an Isabe or the Rosemary makes one that's really similar, and that's it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I love it. I love it, love it, love it.
Emilie Lygren is a writer, outdoor educator, facilitator, and poet. She co-authored the book How to Teach Nature Journaling with John Muir and is going to be one of the leaders of the discussion at the Wild Wonder Teachers Conference. At the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference, Emilie is giving a class called Writing Our Way to Wonder, Creating Poetry from Journal Entries. I'm so looking forward to this session. Emilie has recently published a book of poetry called What We Were Born For, and it's incredibly moving. I asked Emilie about her earliest experiences of poetry.
I mean, it circles back to that being alone as a kid outside. And having this experience of just being quiet and having words arise. And that's still, like, that quiet is still something that I chase. It's harder to find as an adult with, like, internet and things and jobs and all of that. But when I'm able to really get quiet, there's just so much to notice. And in terms of writing poetry, it feels really resonant, actually, with drawing or other kind of ways of being mindful and present. It comes back to noticing. I notice how wonder it reminds me of, which is, foundational to Beatles, foundational to nature journaling. If you can just kind of stick with that noticing, looking at things that you can see or perceive through any senses, the sensations that you touch, and just start writing it down in nature. And then kind of the joy of poetry for me is then turning that noticing inward. What's it like to be holding the leaf? What's it like to be, running your finger over the veins and feeling the textures? What's it like to be noticing the moss that, covers this tree, covers the cracks in the bark of the tree? What is it like to, ask a question that you've never asked before? And poetry, to me, is really just putting those things onto the page, in addition to what we're noticing about our surroundings.
I hope you enjoyed revisiting the conversations that I had with some of the teachers that will be presenting at the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference. This is just a small sample of the teachers that will be at the conference. There's going to be more than 30 teachers and speakers this year. I'll leave a link to the conference website in the show notes for this episode, where you can find all the details and register. There's one other teacher through this podcast who will be speaking at both the Wild Wonder Teachers Conference and the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference this year, and that's me. For the Teachers Conference, I'm giving a breakout session called Nature Journaling at Every Stage, adapting nature journaling practice to suit children of different ages. I'm really excited about this because it's something dear to my heart. My son is 4, almost 5, and he's been nature journaling beside me since he was 1 year old. I love that nature journaling is something that grows with the child and can be adapted and suited to each child's interest and level. Also, for the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference, I'll be giving a workshop called Sky Scarpitos, Mastering Cloud Shapes and Sky Colors. I love learning about clouds and skies, and the workshop I'll give is going to be an exploration of how to quickly capture skies in your nature journal in a fun and easy way, as well as becoming familiar with the different types of clouds we see regularly. I can't wait to spend some time in the clouds with the community during this workshop. So I hope this has been a fun little peek into what you can expect at the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.